Hi folks, welcome to today's episode of My Life with Robert Burns. Jim Thompson, myself here again. Hi Jim, how you doing?
Doing great, Douglas. Hi everybody.
Our guest this week is somebody who's very, very busy. She's a teacher and is in the middle of doing all sorts of teaching stuff, so she's managed to give us a bit of time tonight. It's a person who you will probably all know. She was formerly the president of the Ayrshire Association of Burns Clubs, cronies everywhere. To tell us all about her life with Robert Burns, Lesley Richardson. Hi, Lesley.
Good evening.
And how are you? A little bit harassed with all the work to do around schools.
And having to get a 10-year-old to show me how to switch on my camera on Zoom. So I'm on now and ready to go.
Good. Well, we'll just get started straight away and ask you, first of all, if you can tell the folks out there a little bit about yourself.
So I am, my name's Lesley Ann Richardson. I was Lesley Dyack and born and bred West Kilbride all my life. I've never, I've had the Glasgow life at university, but I came back and settled in West Kilbride, and I've lived in West Kilbride all my life. I live in Seamill, which is part of West Kilbride. We had a vote in West Kilbride many years ago as to whether we should be called Seamill on its own or West Kilbride on its own. And they voted for West Kilbride incorporating Seamill. So that's where I live, West Kilbride incorporating Seamill. My mum and dad, my dad had a Dyack's garage in Seamill. He had a garage business all his days, and my mum was a physiotherapist and she worked in Millport, and she's from the Peyton Butcher Empire in Largs, very well known butchers in Largs. And I grew up in Seamill with my brother and my sister, and we had an amazing childhood in West Kilbride, loads and loads of things on in our community when we were younger, very involved with the Boys Brigade in the village, and we had BB fetes to envy all fetes in West Kilbride, and school sports days down the Glen, gala days, play schemes, very, very full childhood, and most of it was spent outdoors as well, with the Seamill Hydro next door to us. So we learned to swim in seawater in the Seamill Hydro with chlorine tablets at the bottom of it. It wasn't your normal water, it was actual seawater. And Brenda Blue was our swimming teacher, and we all learned to swim at the Seamill Hydro. So West Kilbride was a great place, great village to grow up in, and I'm glad now that I can bring James up in that village as well. It's a great wee community.
And James is the 10-year-old that got you online tonight?
James is the 10-year-old that got me online tonight.
Very, very good.
The primary school, my primary school years, West Kilbride Primary School was where I went to, and it was just absolutely superb. And from 1978 till 1985, and probably some of my happiest days were spent at West Kilbride Primary School. I loved school, and I remember performing at Burns suppers at primary school and performing in the poetry competitions at primary school. And then one of my favourite teachers was my primary 6 teacher, Mrs. Hodge, and it was Mrs. Hodge's love of Burns that definitely got me into Burns, and she would teach us lots of different Burns poems. And then I remember winning the competition the year I was in her class, and she invited me to West Kilbride Burns Club, Burns Supper, and asked me if I would recite To a Louse. And I remember it being such an honour, and I got dressed up in my kilt, and I remember my mum had bought me new black painting shoes to wear, and I went down to the Hydro with my grandpa, who was a past president, and my mum and dad, and they all came and sat and watched, and that was my first kind of taste of Burns suppers. But all the way through primary school, I just, from when I was young, from when I was at primary school, I always thought that one of the career paths I might follow was teaching. And now in my own teaching career, I make sure that in the schools that I'm teaching, lots of Scots language, whether it's Burns poems or just Scottish poems, and the kids all love the Scottish poems, and a lot of times it's only really done in January. But but throughout my class, I try and put in wee kind of snippets the whole year through. But certainly, primary school was where it all began for me, for Burns, but also my whole life really. And from primary one at West Kilbride Primary School, I had a great crowd of friends at school, and those friends were either from my parents' friends' children that I'd known all my life, or friends that I made in primary school. And the same friends I went on to secondary school with at Ardrossan Academy, and these same friends have been a huge part of my life all my life. And even now, in fact, at my 21st birthday party, I had probably over a third of the children that were in my school primary one photo were at my 21st, and the same crowd were at my 30th and my 40th. And maybe 3 years' time, I might have the same crowd at my 50th.
That's amazing. Well done.
One of the wee Scottish poems that I teach the kids is Michael, and I don't know if you've ever heard it. It's only a couple of verses long, but the kids absolutely love it, and it's called Michael. It's the best steak mince for Michael. Aye, it's only the best for Mick. My daddy near faints when he sneezes and goes off his head when he's sick. I'm fed up with jackets and trousers, cut down for my daddy's old suits. But Mick got a new coat for his Christmas for buying a twa pair of boots. Yon night, I was shivering and sweating. It was through getting soaked, I suppose. My mammy said, he's got a temperature. And my daddy felt Michael's nose. Sit back for the fire, says my daddy. Let Michael stretch out in the rug. Aye, Michael's a dirty big greyhound, and I get the life of a duck. The kids love that. That's a great one. And then I moved from there to Ardrossan Academy. And then from Ardrossan Academy, I'd always wanted to be, it was between a primary teacher and a nurse, but I had quite bad eczema, so I failed the medical for nursing. So I ended up going to Jordan Hill College, and Jordan Hill, that was the very last year of it being Jordan Hill College when I arrived. And then in the second year of my teacher training, it turned into Strathclyde University. And I stayed away in halls of residence, and then I had a flat in Arlington Street in Glasgow, right next to the Arlington Bar. And I used to work in the Arlington Bar, which was a great place. The chat and the banter in there was just absolutely superb. You had the taxi drivers, you had the shipbuilders, and then you'd all the boys that worked for the newspapers, for the Express and the Herald. Tom Shields that used to do the diary, they used to all come in. It was a great place. So I stayed in Glasgow for 4 years and then graduated and went back home.
Very good. And you've mentioned James. You better give your other half a wee mention as well.
Yes, I met Billy, and I were married and engaged within about a year and a half. So I'd waited till I was in my late 30s to settle down, which I think was the best plan to do. So we got married in 2007, and James came along in April 2010. Billy is a runner and has represented Scotland and still continues to run. And his whole running career suits me because he goes to different races before COVID, he was racing nearly every weekend. So we would go all over Scotland and stay the night and go to all his different races, from Livingston to Mull half marathons to over to Isla. So it's been great. And even the morning of our wedding, Billy decided that he wanted, Billy's dad died and wasn't at our wedding. So Billy had decided that the morning of our wedding, he was going to have something called the Wedding Day Dash. So the morning of the wedding, Billy had top hat and tails on, and he organised a race for 100 wedding guests and friends around the village and raised over £1,000 for the British Heart Foundation. So that was at 9:30 in the morning, and then we got married in the afternoon.
Well done. Fantastic. And Billy's got a connection with one of our earlier guests on My Life with Robert Burns, Mr. Graham White.
Yes, we've got, I don't know where it is, but we've got a photograph of Graham and Billy lined up for a race. I think it was a international or something, lined up for a running race. So yeah, they used to run together.
Very good. And one of our other guests earlier on in our series of episodes, in fact, I think he was the first, Bobby Jess, was also asking about your family, but he was actually asking about James, because he's keen to get another of James's poems up on his YouTube channel.
Oh, well, James, in fact, I'll show from the minute James was born, he was entered into the world of Burns. I've got a very happy memory of Jim Thompson actually and Joe Kennedy arriving at my door with a present for James when he was only a couple of weeks old, and I couldn't actually come because obviously he was quite wee, and they were on their way, I think, to Routenburn Golf Club, to Lark's Cronies, and I remember them dropping in to see him. And then after that, when James was born in 2010, I was the president of the Ayrshire Association of Burns Clubs, and James didn't have a say, and he just used to come everywhere with me. And I used to have the rucksack backpack, and I used to just have him in the back of the backpack, and I used to just get on with it. Even at I think I was doing the Bible reading at one of the services, one of the January services, I think it was. Yeah. And I remember just going up with him in the backpack to do the Bible reading on my back. And I'd found this wee T-shirt as well. I don't know if you can see it. This was good. He wore this when he went to his very first Mauchline Holy Fair. And it had a wee poem on the back, and it said, "There's summer fu of love divine, there's summer fu of brandy. But I am fu of gets coo's milk, so mine's a pint if it's handy." And that was he was at the Mauchline Holy Fair when he was about 3 months old. So certainly having a baby didn't stop me doing all my Burns things, and I just kept on.
No, I can certainly remember him running about up at the Prake Festival.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, very good. Well, James has given us the perfect link into talking about more about your life with Burns and your career within the Burns movement. So I'll pass over to Jim to get you talking about that.
Lesley, lovely to see you once again.
Lovely to see you.
You've been a very good friend to me over many years, but just basically start off by telling people how you get involved with Burns in the first place.
So I was in primary 6 at West Kilbride Primary School, and certainly from about primary 3 onwards, I always entered all the Burns competitions. And I remember being very, very interested in Burns, not just Burns, but poetry. I just loved poetry. When I was wee, always had poetry books, whether it was A.A. Milne or loads and loads of different poetry books. I loved poetry. And then I used to like the competitions that we had at school. And my teacher was in primary 6 was Mrs. Hodge. And Mrs. Hodge was a superb teacher. And she had a real interest in Burns. And her husband was the president of West Kilbride Burns Club the year that I was in her class. And although before that, when I had won one of the Burns competitions at school in 1982, and my granny gave me my very first Burns book in 1982. And when I was in Mrs. Hodge's class, she had asked me, I had won that year as well, and she'd asked if I would go down to the West Kilbride Burns Club and say my poem as a child. So I remember going down and meeting her in the foyer of the Simo Hydro, and I remember, and it didn't faze me at all. I remember going in, and there must have been a room of about 100, 120 people, and my grandpa was a past president of the West Kilbride Burns Club as well, so he'd taken me down, and Mrs. Hodge met me, and I went in and I did my Burns poem. I think it was To a Louse that I did. And I just remember getting such a buzz and absolutely loving it. And another friend of mine, Graham Innes, he played the accordion, and he was there that night as well, and he was playing his accordion. And we had another friend from the village that you'll probably all know that sadly passed, Gordon McKellar, who was the piper. And Gordon was there as well. And I just remember it was superb. And that was the first time that I'd ever actually been at a big kind of Burns supper like that. And then after that, I remember Betty Herbertson and all the Anne Gaw and all them from the schools competitions. I remember going in for the schools, I think it was the Grange, and I got highly commended there. But I remember Mrs. Hodge telling me that I should really learn a poem, something that was a wee bit different, because everybody was doing To a Mouse and To a Louse. And I remember her going through her Burns book and saying to me, well, maybe we should learn something different, a different poem. So the one that I did was called, There's a Youth in This City. And that is also called The Laddie's Dear Cell. And it's quite a short poem, but that was the poem that I did when I was in primary 7, and I got highly commended for the Burns Federation from that. So that was my that was my kind of
it?
Yes, Are you ready?
Yes.
Yeah, why not?
There's a youth in this city. It was a great pity that he, fair lasses, should wander awa, for he's bonny and braw, and his hair has a natural buckle and all. His coat is the hue, his bonnet sae blue, his fecket as white as the new driven snow. His hose they are blue, and they shone like the sleigh, and his clear silver buckles, they dazzle us all. For beauty and fortune, the laddie's been courting, well featured, well tokered, well mounted and braw, but chiefly the siller that gars them gang tiller, the penny's the jewel that beautifies all. There's Meg with a mailin that fain would have haen him, and Susie, whose daddy's the laird of the hall. There's lang-talkered Nancy, maist fettered his fancy, but the laddie's dear cell, he lood dearest of all. And that was the one, I liked that, it was a super poem. And then from, that was my kind of first Burns Supper experience. And then after that, through taking the Boys Brigades, we had Burns Suppers with the uniformed organisations. We used to have the Brownies and the BBs. So I did quite a lot of suppers through that. And then through that, somebody that was in the church where we met for the BBs had then said, oh, we're having a church Burns Supper. Why don't you come to the church Burns Supper and you could do the lasses? So that was the first time I'd ever done to the lasses. And that was at the West Kilbride St Andrew's Church Burns Supper, and that was where I then met Gordon and Angus, although I knew them from the village. That's where I first met Angus and Gordon at that Burns Supper. And from there we were chatting, I was chatting with Angus about the fact that West Kilbride Burns Club had defunct by this time, and we were just kind of saying how sad it was that all these Burns Suppers, West Kilbride had loads of Burns Suppers, curling clubs, golf clubs, loads of them, but it was quite sad that the Burns club just no longer existed. So, and my grandpa had been a past president and I had his medals and everything. So we then decided to put some letters out to the village and see if anyone would like to come and rejuvenate it. And we ended up we had an EGM with about 50 people, and then we ended up doing the Burns Suppers that Angus talked about in his Life with Burns. But we pitched it very much to try and get all age groups to come. So it was very much with a ceilidh as well as the Burns Supper, so that we could try and encourage young people that maybe hadn't heard much about Burns to come. And it wasn't like a full kind of 4-hour Burns Supper of speakers and everything. There was a ceilidh. So the ceilidh certainly appealed to some people, and maybe the Burns bit not as much. And then a lot of the elderly people that used to be in the Burns Club all came back and rejoined when we reaffiliated it, and they enjoyed the Burns Supper part of it, and then they would go home when the ceilidh started. So it was superb, it really was.
You must have had quite a few Burns Supper highlights in the time you've been involved. Recall any? Absolutely.
Certainly, I think one of my favourite Burns Suppers was with, I think you were there, Jim, it was Angus and I and Joe Kennedy, and I think yourself, and we all went. It was an afternoon, it was a Sunday afternoon, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and Joe Kennedy had organised us all to go to Hurlford Football Club. And it was absolutely superb. It was very informal, very impromptu, and it was one of the best suppers I'd been to. It was just, it was superb. And another one was one that Jimmy Gibson had invited me to with Willie Morrison, and that was the Johnny Walker Burns supper. And just as we were walking up to go to the table, Willie Morrison fell in front of me, and of course was lying on the ground, and it was all. So we ended up with an ambulance, and the ambulance arrived, and of course Willie by this time had kind of got himself kind of together, and the ambulance man had said, "Now, have you had a blackout before?" "Oh, aye, when I was in Africa." Oh, he was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And another one was when I was with the Larks Cronies lot, Joe McGinty and David Galt and Ray, and it was one that was in the Puffer in Irvine, and it was David Galt got up to address the haggis, and he put the knife into the haggis, and the whole thing was frozen. And it was brilliant. They'd never done a Burns supper before, this place, and of course, I don't think they hadn't defrosted the haggis, and the whole thing, just the knife ricocheted. It was, but no, I've had some great Burns suppers.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking there. You Joe Kennedy and Bill Morrison and Joe McGinty, who are, none of them are unfortunately aren't with us anymore.
I know.
It must. And there's others, Charlie McGuire. I mean, I could name a lot, but.
Oh.
You know, there must be some Burns supper up there every year, you know.
I know. And the other one is the gentleman with the handlebar moustache.
He was the chief super in the police.
Yes, he was from, I did another football one, and it was Ayr United.
Andrew Charters.
Andrew Charters, that's exactly. Andrew Charters. I've got a cracking photograph of myself and Bill Morrison and Andrew Charters in Irvine Lassies and Burns Club. And he was an absolute character as well.
A gentleman as well, Andrew.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that, and like Phil Todd and Harry Bull, all these people, and I think earlier on I was talking about how I've kept my friendships with friends from primary school, and I'm still friendly with them. I value my friendships so much. Friendship is a huge part of my life, and I feel very, very blessed. Every time, I had my birthday just last week, and I do feel blessed every time I have a birthday, because I've had a best friend that never made it to 18. I had a very good friend that never made it to 40. I had another friend that didn't get past their 20s, and another very good friend that was only a year past their 40s. And Burns has, at 3 of those funerals, I had the privilege to read poems at their funerals, and 3 of those funerals I read Burns poems. So I've used Burns words to comfort people at funerals, and not just that, but I've read Burns at friends' weddings as well. But the poems that I read at these funerals were all about friendship. One of them was the epitaph on my friend. An honest man here lies at rest, as e'er God with his image blessed. Friend of man, a friend of truth, friend of age, a guide of youth. Few hearts like this with virtue warmed, few heads of knowledge so informed. If there's another world, he lives in bliss. If none, he made the best of this. And then the other one that I read at my other friend's funeral was a bottle and a friend. Here's a bottle, an honest friend. What would you wish for mere man? What kens before his life may end? What his share may be, a care man. And then my favourite verse follows on from that. Catch the moments as they fly and use them as ye ought, man. Believe me, happiness is shy and comes not I when sought, man. So certainly I've used Burns to comfort people, to bring joy to people. And the theme of friendship runs through all these poems. And that's the major thing about Burns, whether it's been the Ayrshire Association, the Federation, local Burns clubs like the Irvine Lassies, and even back in the day, we'd go up to the Faulds House and round all the different clubs, Greenock and everywhere, and Skelmerley, Pussy Nancy's. And it just, the friends that I have made in the Burns world, all a lot older than me, but the friends that I've made in the Burns world, I mean, just absolutely. I think I kind of went for all the older men like Bill Morrison and Andrew Charters. There was just something about all these guys when they used to go up and recite their poems, even if it wasn't Burns. I don't know who it was. Was it Harry Bull that used to do the Sam McGee?
Yeah,
was it Phil Todd? There was quite a few of them.
I've done it for so many years as well. But Harry did it. Phil certainly was very accomplished with service. I mean, there's quite a few.
Oh, all these club nights, I used to just love listening to all these people with all their different poems and everything. I mean, the talent out there was amazing, but the friendship that I got from was superb. We also, another funny Burns, well, not funny Burns moment, but Angus and Tracy and I and Andy from Largs and Brenda, and we all went in a bus from Largs that Jimmy Law had organised. And of course, it had to be funny if it was Jimmy Law. So he'd organised Pussy Nancy Skelmley, and we would go for a tour of the Nith. And of course, we all had the plastic cups with the drink, and we were dropped off randomly in the middle of nowhere. We'd done on Cluden Abbey, and we were in Dumfries, and we were just dropped off basically at the banks of the Nith. And I think the plan was we'd done Ellisland Farm and everything. We were just to kind of walk in. So of course, Tracy and I and Angus and Brent and Andy are walking along this path with Jimmy with his wine and his plastic cups. And I mean, the scenery that we saw was amazing. And we came to these kind of beautiful, like sculptured pyramids, and there was like beautiful artificial. And I mean, it was amazing, this place that we fell upon. And it wasn't until I turned round and there was a huge big sign that said trespassers will be prosecuted, no trespassing. I don't know where we were, but it was like, I think it was like a millionaire's garden or something like that. I think we just encroached on somebody's garden, but it was absolutely, it was hilarious. It was just Jimmy. And I mean, we must have stopped at about 20 different places that day, and he'd organised nothing, but it was brilliant. It was superb.
Very good. You've talked about all the friends you made within the Burns world as it is now. Are there any characters within the Burns story itself that you regard as heroes or people that you had a lot of respect for?
Yeah, well, I think going through when I've done research and stuff for my lassies, I mean, I really like the lassies, and when I'm studying Burns, it would be the lassies that I would be drawn to, but also just all the different friends that Burns had through his life, like Betty Davidson and Frances Dunlop and Clorinda. But I think Jean Armour for me, and I've enjoyed, I've got a wee Jean Armour speech, and I've been to quite a lot of Jean Armour suppers, Barnhouse birthdays, and there's quite a lot of long running Jean Armour suppers. I've spoken maybe about 5 or 6 different Jean Armour suppers, one of them being the one that was held at Brigadoon by the Hansel Village, organised it every year. And that was a very kind of royal occasion. And then the Barnhouse birthdays was up in Beath, and that was a lot of farmers' wives and everything. And it was superb. And I've got a speech about Jean Armour, and I did it quite recently at a wee Jean Armour talk at the Bachelors Club. Their Tuesday nights before lockdown. I did it there. But I just think Jean Armour was just an amazing friend to Burns, and I just think the fact that she lived on for so long after she was widowed for nearly 37 years after after Burns died. And I think the story of her wee granddaughter was that Sarah coming back over to live with her, and her other siblings died en route, and it was only Sarah that survived the journey. I think the stories about Jean Armour, I love Jean Armour's story.
Tremendous. So I'm guessing you're available for bookings if anybody out there is looking for somebody to get a toast to Jean Armour. Oh, definitely, yeah. I enjoy doing Jean Armour. And I think that the whole Burns supper scene, I think if you can do, because I've addressed the haggis, I've done the haggis, I've done the lassies, I've done the mortal memory, I've done poems, but probably I prefer doing the lassies more than anything. And I think there's not
that many people that are kind of willing to do it anymore. I don't know. It used to be loads and loads of folk to ask, but now it seems to be the same people. Certainly the suppers that I've been at, there's not that many new up and coming. And I'm kind of wheeled out every year.
Oh, very good.
But probably actually my first burn supper, apart from the one when I was in primary school, I worked in a pub in Largs, which was called Flanagan's years ago. It was in the Gallowgate Square, and it's now called The Room, and it's just opposite the big car park at the front at Largs, near the Millport Ferry. And I worked in there for years and years, from kind of 1990s, very early 1990s onwards. And Stephen, the owner of Flanagan's, used to have a burn supper every year, and I used to do the haggis and whatever else he needed me to do. But there was an awful lot of people that came into the pub that worked in IBM, and they were all foreigners, and they used to love the burn suppers, but they would sit there and they also didn't have a clue what we're talking about, but they just loved it. They loved the camaraderie, they loved the friendship, they loved being there. And after a few years, we'd asked if they would like to contribute, and then they started, they picked up a Burns book and they were reading To a Mouse at the supper one year, but I mean, not a word was translated properly, but the fact that they'd stood up with the Burns book and they wanted to do it was just brilliant. But I mean, the translation was hilarious, but it was great.
Very good. Well, we're pushed for time, as you know, today, so before we finish off, what about ambition? Is there anything else that you want to do with your Burns career? Any positions you'd be looking for in the hierarchy, or any poems you'd like to learn, that kind of thing? No positions in the hierarchy. I think the Ayrshire Association was, I think, as high as I would go, but I just want more time to actually get back to Ayrshire Association. And obviously I've got Boys Brigade, I've got the parish church, I've got James, so I've not had that much time. I've got school, I've not had that much time on my hands, but I certainly want to go back. We went to New York for a honeymoon, and I definitely want to go back to New York and see the Burns statue. That was just something else. It was superb. No, I like the letters, the Burns letters. I've been reading the Burns letters.
Well, you obviously got that with Joe Kennedy then. Yes,
I liked it. I enjoyed listening to his chat about his letters.
Well, Lesley, I think we'll probably finish off there. It's been tremendous that you were able to find that slot of time to talk to us tonight. That was tremendous. And I think everybody's going to enjoy listening to your life with Robert Burns. So thanks for giving us up the time.
Thank you very much, Douglas. Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Mr. Thompson.